I'm filmmaker Jim Hubbard, and you're watching The Artists Forum.
Welcome to the Artists Forum. I'm your host, Dyllon Burnside, and I have the great pleasure of introducing you to the award-winning filmmaker, Jim Hubbard. Welcome to the Artists Forum, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. Thank you for being here. So obviously you're an artist. Tell me, what's your favorite thing about being an artist, specifically filmmaker?
Well, the best thing about being a filmmaker is that I get to do exactly what I want. That's because also because I'm an experimental filmmaker, and there isn't any money in it, but I get to do what I want. And so that's something that very few people get to do. So I'm really grateful for that.
What does that mean to be an experimental filmmaker?
Well, it means that I treat the medium as an aesthetic or philosophical medium rather than as entertainment.
Okay.
That my films don't have stories. They are they're mostly poetic in structure, and I process my own film, and so I play around with the color, and so it's not naturalistic. It's sort of expressionistic, and I do various things with the chemical nature of the film.
What was it that sparked your interest in filmmaking?
I don't know. I always wanted to be a filmmaker. The earliest memory I have of film is going to Radio City Music Hall with my grandmother and sitting in the front row and seeing the Shaggy Dog. And I just, like I was probably 4 or 5 years old, and I remember having this, I have this image of this, like 40-foot high sheepdog. And so, somehow that the excitement and the glory of the moving image really grabbed me and has never let go. But the difficult part was trying to figure out how to be a filmmaker.
Right.
Because when I was a kid, all I knew about was Hollywood movies.
Yeah.
And I had no idea how you got to make those. And it turned out I had no interest in making those kind of films. And it was only when I was living in San Francisco in the mid-1970s and discovered experimental film and realized that here was a way for me not only to make films, but make the films that I wanted to make in exactly the way I wanted to make them. And talk about what was important to me and what was important to the community that I felt I was a part of. So
you made your, correct me if I'm wrong, you made your first film in 1974, is that correct?
Yes, that is true.
So from little Jim Hubbard with his grandmother seeing the Shaggy Dog to 1974, what were the steps that got you to that place? I mean, for many young filmmakers that may be watching this, I'm sure they're also wondering, like, okay, gosh, they've seen a movie that's inspired them and they want to make a film, but they have no idea how. And you try this and you try that. What were the steps that got you to there? What did you try initially? Did you go to school to study filmmaking? What was your journey like?
Well, it wasn't very direct, actually. My parents were always trying to force me to be a very mainstream person.
Right.
You know, my father was incredibly right-wing, and we fought about the Vietnam War. And so I really didn't see any way of doing it. And then
Mainstream in terms of filmmaking, or mainstream in terms of your career choice?
mainstream in terms of everything. I mean, my father wanted me to be a lawyer.
I see.
And I would have been a terrible lawyer. And I have, no interest in that whatsoever. So I graduated college and ran away to San Francisco and tried to figure out, what the rest of my life was going to be. And not thinking in terms of making films at all. Because even at that point, it didn't seem like a possibility that it could be a reality. And I was walking down the back of Nob Hill smoking a joint one day. And I said to myself, you always wanted to be a filmmaker, so why don't you go ahead and be one?
Wow.
And so I started to figure out how you could be. And I started going to see screenings, and I went to a screening at the San Francisco Art Institute at a screening series called Canyon Cinema, Canyon Cinematheque. And they were showing a film by Stan Brakhage called Texts of Light, which is a completely abstract film. It's a film of light that's shining through a crystal ashtray. And it goes on for 45 minutes.
Wow.
And it was mesmerizing. But also, Brakhage, who is this very straight guy, was introduced by James Browden, who is this wonderful guy. And I said, oh, I want to study under that queen, meaning James. And so I went back to the school, to the San Francisco Art Institute, and learned filmmaking. And James always hated, he never liked me saying that I was a student of his, because the class I took with him was androgyny. It wasn't a film production class. It was this thing called androgyny. It was San Francisco in the 70s, and you could do things like that.
Right.
And I just figured, started filming myself and my friends and things around me. And it specifically was several years later. I went to a meeting, this was in Philadelphia, that was supposed to organize the first March on Washington for lesbian and gay rights. And I brought my little Super 8 camera thinking, oh, I'll film something, not really having any idea in mind. And the first thing that happened, there was this 45-minute debate, vociferous debate, about whether cameras should be allowed in the room or not. Because on the one side, there were people who could lose their jobs, could lose their kids, whose lives actually might be in danger if their homosexuality became known. And on the other hand, there were people who saw this as a historical event and wanted it documented. So the compromise that was reached was that people who wanted to be filmed would sit on the left side of the auditorium, and people who didn't want to be filmed would sit on the right side of the auditorium. And by the end of the weekend, nobody was sitting on the right side of the auditorium. And so I felt that, here's a group of people for whom having their image taken is literally a life or death issue.
Right.
And I said, this is what I have to film.
Yeah.
And so I've been filming the gay community, the lesbian and gay community, the queer community. The designation keeps changing. But this community that I'm a part of, I've been filming it ever since.
So at that time, like you said, you were just carrying your Super 8 around, filming things. Yes, you had, when you were smoking that joint on Nob Hill, decided that you were going to be a filmmaker, but when you were carrying the camera around, did you know you were making a film, or were you just filming things? What was going on in your head at the time?
Well, it depended on the moment. I mean, there were some things that I just filmed because I thought they were interesting and thought they should be filmed.
Yeah.
But there were certain periods where I was very specifically working on a film and would go, say, okay, I need to film this now. and that would get filmed, and then, oh, I need to film that, and I'd go from thing to thing to thing, filming it until I amassed a critical mass of footage, and then began to edit it. And so the film actually is created in the editing process.
Mm-hmm. So let's say Two Marches, for instance, which I saw an excerpt from. It's aesthetically beautiful. Talk to me about the medium, the actual, I don't know the word to use, but you used film, obviously. What was that process like from filming it with the Super 8? There was this march that you were filming, that you were just speaking about, and then there was another march. Talk to me about the experience, both being at the two different marches, and also when it came time to edit that footage. What was that process like?
Right. Well, the first march is 1979.
Okay.
And that's shot on Super 8. And then the second march is in 1987, and that's shot on 16 millimeter.
Okay.
And I had made a film about the 79 march called March On, but it was a long film. It was 50 minutes long, and it wasn't terribly showable.
Okay.
It was, it was a young person's film. And then in 1991, I decided that I needed to make a film, right? And I had all this footage of the two marches, and actually it was Sarah who said, "Why don't you make a film about the two marches?" So I set about editing it. But first, the Super 8 had to be blown up to 16, so that it could be put together with the
Right.
87 march. But there's one other element that I haven't talked about, which is that I process the film myself. Now, this is something that certain experimental filmmakers do. A handful of us do it.
Okay.
It's unusual, but I literally, take the film out of the camera and put it in these chemical baths.
Okay.
And process it, and so that it's showable. But also, I play around with the chemistry and I do things to it, and those images that you saw, are not normal images. They're not what Kodak
Right.
thought that would be what would be done with that film. It's more a painterly approach.
Absolutely.
To film.
I was curious about, there's this reddish tint to the film. I don't know if that's just something that happened. Was that your intention, or was that something that has been translated from the film to digital world?
No. That's actually on the film, and that's
Okay.
that's a very particular thing, because the 79 march is shot on Kodachrome,
Okay.
and Kodachrome is very difficult to process. In fact, I'm the only person in the world who has ever hand processed Kodachrome.
Wow.
And the way that I did it was that I decided I was going to process it, right? It was a crazy idea. So I call up this lab. I was living in Minneapolis at the time. I call up this lab, and I say, could I speak to the chemist? So they transfer me to this young woman, and I tell her what I want to do. And she says, okay, bring 7 1-gallon jugs, and I'll give you the chemistry. So I brought my little, brown plastic jugs. They're not little, they're this big, right? But the chemistry for this lab, which is a commercial lab, is in 300-gallon tanks sitting 20 feet off the ground. So I had to siphon it into these little jugs. Right?
So how do you stop it?
I made a complete
Right.
mess. Oh God, the chemistry was all over the place, and I, mopped it up. And she even let me come back a second time, which was amazing. And so I used this to process the Super 8 footage from the 79 march, and that red is because Kodachrome is particularly sensitive to red. It has beautiful reds.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just got emphasized in my particular processing of it.
Nice. It was beautiful. So in looking at some of your work, one who doesn't necessarily know the terminology, you'd think it's, I would just say it's documentary in nature. But this is kind of the world that you've ventured into. Would you talk a little bit about that in terms of the genre or the style? How would you codify that?
Well, it is documentary. I mean,
Okay.
almost all the footage in my films is actuality footage.
Okay.
That there are some instances in Memento Mori that I set up, and the dance. That obviously the song is. We did 2 takes of it.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, it's all documentary footage, and so I'm this weird amalgam of aesthetic filmmaker and documentarian. And it's, most people find it very confusing.
Sure.
But to me, what I get to do is to really look at what there is to see, to look at what is in the world. But also I get to remake it the way I actually see it and think about it. And so it's not just, it's not just a march, but it's, what's going on with these people within the march and how they're behaving towards each other and what it means for them. And so the filming and the processing heightens the emotion and the feeling about what's going on, and that's what I'm trying to do. So it's like painting a moving painting.
Absolutely. You spoke a little bit a few minutes ago about how when you first did the March On film, it wasn't something that was showable, that it was something that a young person made. Talk a little bit about what that meant. So did that mean that when you first created that you didn't show it to anyone, or how did you decide when you would show a piece or when something was ready, or what's that process like for you in sharing your work, and how has that evolved over time?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question because, with March On, okay, it's 50 minutes long, and I was highly influenced by this group of filmmakers who were very influential at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
The structuralist filmmakers. And the structuralist filmmakers, the way they worked is that they decided on the way the film was going to be technically constructed before they made the film, and then the film was made according to these rules.
Okay.
Right? It's it's a kind of formalism. So what I decided was that I had all this footage, and that the basic structure of this film would be that there would be unedited rolls, and a roll of Super 8 film is 3 minutes and 20 seconds. So it was, I forget how many, it must have been about 15 rolls, unedited. But I had filmed 30 or 50 rolls. So there was quite a selection process, but it wasn't evident to the audience.
When watching it.
And it was a lot to ask of an audience. And I, being a young person, I didn't realize what I was asking the audience to endure in that film. I think it's a beautiful film, but it asks a lot. And so in going to make 2 marches, I took that 50 minutes, right, and I distilled it into 4.
Yeah. So how do you, if you were to take that experience and translate it into some form of advice to someone who's watching now, an artist who's like really sold on this grand idea, as we artists tend to be, we have these ideas that seem great and we have to really try it out. What's the advice that you would give after it's tried out to that person? Okay, how do they adjust to make sure that it's something that the audience can handle or something that's digestible? Right.
So, well, as you're working on something and you're trying to create something, you have this idea of what it is going to be and what it's going to convey, and you know, it's not necessarily true that what you have in your head will actually convey what you want to convey.
Yeah.
So you really have to test it out. So take the film as far as you can take it, and then show it to a few people you trust, and see how it works. And you know, you have to be relaxed and be able to take criticism, and allow those people that you do trust to tell you what's working and what doesn't work, what's confusing, what they, you know, like they really love and what they really hate, and then you take that information and you go back and work on the film. And sometimes, you know, sometimes they'll say they hate something, and it's so important that you have to leave it in.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll say they really love something, and you really love something, but you realize it's just not working.
Sure.
And it has to get cut out. So there really has to be some sort of process where you test the work against the real world.
Absolutely. I want to read you a quote
Okay.
that I pulled off of highbeam.net. And it says about you, he believes that experimental film can more honestly communicate the lesbian gay experience and is much less alienating than stupid narrative movies with homosexual characters. Talk to me about that quote.
Okay.
Is that something that you said?
Yes, I said that. I've said it several times, and I mean it. That I think that, you know, it's not only true of queer people. You know, I'm sure it's true of black people as well. That the real lives that we live are not being shown on TV.
Sure.
They're not being reflected in Hollywood movies.
Sure.
And so when you really have control of the medium, when you have control of the means of production, you can make films that are really, you know, about your life and reflect the life you see around you. And those, you know, those stupid the perfect example I was thinking of was Will and Grace.
Okay.
So here's this TV program that's supposedly about gay people, right?
Right.
And there are these two gay guys. But what it's really about, it's really about I Love Lucy. It's, you know, there are these two couples that play off against each other. So if you look at, you know, like, I can't remember their name. There's Will and Grace, obviously, and there's Jack and the other woman, right? Who are really Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball and Fred and Ethel Mertz. And so it really has nothing to do with gay men or straight women living in New York City in the 1990s, or, you know, whenever that was made. It has to do with these formulas which were decided and figured out in the 1950s.
Sure. That's really interesting. You know, Nina Simone has said that it's an artist's duty to reflect the times. And I think a lot of people, especially that find themselves within marginalized communities, a lot of artists that find themselves within marginalized communities, their work tends to have a political tone, or there seems to be some type of activism happening. Would you consider yourself an activist?
Yeah, I do. I do call myself an activist, but my activism is through my filmmaking. That I've almost never gone to a demonstration without a camera, and I feel awkward when I do, and I'm very self-conscious about screaming chants and everything, and I'm scared of the police. But with a camera in my hand, I know what to do. I have a purpose.
Yeah.
So. You know, I believe in political art. I think all art is political and always has been. And that the art that isn't political is really expressing mainstream politics and supporting the status quo. And it's the work of those of us who are marginalized, who live lives that are, you know, not regimented and not, the structure of whose lives are decided by ourselves and by our community rather than by the larger forces of the world. We have to do the art that is true to ourselves and make the films and paint the paintings and write the books and the poems that are about the the politics as we see it, and it's much more fulfilling than supporting the mainstream. But you're probably not going to get paid a whole lot to do
Right.
it.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
I was wondering, what are some of the downsides to your choice to pursue that? And I'm also curious as to, at what point did you decide that you were not going to pander to the mainstream, and in essence, do what you did when you made the decision to go to San Francisco and not pander to what your father wanted you to do. What was that decision-making process like, and what have you sacrificed to be able to tell the stories that you want to tell the way that you want to tell them?
I'm not sure there was a decision-making process. I think it was just, it was there. I mean, I can tell, when I was deciding, when I went back to school, or decided to go back to school, I went to the San Francisco Art Institute, ultimately, which is a great place to learn to be an artist. But I also went to other schools. I went down to UCLA, which has probably the most famous film and television school in the country. And there were all these guys who thought they would be the next Steven Spielberg, or and they were, they'd talk about how, they could bring it in south of 5. That I always remember that.
What does that mean?
What they were saying is that they could make a movie for less than $5 million. And I just thought, these people are ridiculous. And these people are probably the head of Columbia Studios right now.
Yeah.
I have no idea who the hell they are. But I realized this is not what I want to do. And yes, you gain the power of making the things you want to make. But the sacrifice is that you don't get the recognition that you would. If you make films or you make art that is critical of the power structure, you can only expect so much reward from the power structure. And I spent most of my life typing for a living. There was a time up until sometime in the 90s where there was a job called word processing, right, which doesn't exist anymore, where you'd sit at a computer and you'd type for Citibank, and I did that, and I got paid well enough so that I could work half-time and I could make my films, and that's one of the huge problems in New York is that you can't do that anymore. Those kind of jobs don't exist, and also the economy is different, where it's not possible to work half-time and afford an apartment,
right,
and feed yourself. And so the possibility of being an artist is severely restricted in 2016 in New York, and ultimately that is very damaging to the city and to the culture, and it has to change. But I don't know how it's going to change.
And to those marginalized peoples who usually fall somewhere on the lower end of the economic scale, how do you suggest that they struggle with this idea of not falling into the mainstream, the temptation of falling into the mainstream so that they can achieve some kind of commercial success or recognition so they can pay the bills? How do they make that decision given today's climate? Or what do they do? What are the things that they can do to help them still be able to speak their truth?
It's really hard, and I'm not sure that I certainly don't have a simple answer. There are ways of doing it. People, I think the most prominent way that people do it is they teach.
Sure.
That teaching gives enough flexibility so that you get a decent salary, and you have time enough to do your work. But it's draining.
Yeah.
It really is draining. I don't know what other advice to have except, like have rich parents. Uh,
Some kind of benefactor.
You can't plan that, though. But, rich parents turn out horrible people like Donald Trump. so it's not a good plan either way.
I hear that. You've discussed being an experimental filmmaker, and a part of the work that you do is you've also been the co-founder of a film festival that is kind of at the center of queer and lesbian and gay experimental film and video called Mix NYC. Would you just tell us a little bit about that and what was the impetus to starting that film festival?
Well, the impetus was that I couldn't get a screening. That I had made this film called Homosexual Desire, Minnesota. It was a 69-minute self-processed film on gay life in Minnesota. And for some reason, I don't understand, people didn't want to show it. And this, again, Sarah Schulman and I were in her apartment one cold February night, and we were smoking a joint. A lot of the turning points in my life
I love it.
revolved around marijuana, which I no longer can smoke. But nevertheless, I have great nostalgia for it. And as she handed me the joint, she said, we should start a lesbian and gay experimental film festival. And I said, I've always wanted to do that. When should we do it? And she said, how about September? And I said, well, how long should it be? 2 weeks? And she said, well, how about a week? So we just did it. And we really didn't have any idea what we were getting ourselves into, nor did we know that there would be a second one. But we just put out the word that we were looking for experimental queer work, and we started to meet people. 50% of the films actually came from the East Village. That the filmmakers lived within a few blocks of us, and so there was a lot of like talking to friends and friends of friends and friends and friends of friends, and it was all filmed in those days because I didn't know how to show video, and we just did it, and because there was a vacuum for that kind of work and a hunger for it, we had an audience and we could build on it. And Sarah and I ran it for 5 years, and it's now 27 years old.
And it's still running.
And it's still going, and it's very different, very, very different, because now it includes installation and performance, and so it's not only film, but it's performing the same function. It's showing images that are unique and exciting to a community from which those images come. And that community is very different now from what it was in 1987. And so the festival has to be very different.
Yeah. So before we get out of here, I want to read another quote. Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter wrote a letter that I read recently, and this quote just made me think of you and your work. And they said, as an artist, creator, and dreamer of this world, we ask you not to be discouraged by what you see, but to use your own lives and by extension your art as vehicles for the construction of peace. Thank you for all the work that you've done to help with the construction of peace. You have a documentary that you've been working on recently, United in Anger.
Well, United in Anger has been done for several years. I've been showing it around the world. It's the full title is United in Anger, A History of ACT UP. So it grows out of the ACT UP Oral History Project, and it's a history of this incredible group that really changed the world. That, the lesson from United in Anger is that a small group of people completely focused on their goals can change the world.
And that's exactly what they did.
Yes.
And you captured it.
Yeah,
so thank you for that. Is there somewhere that we can find that, or is there going to be a screening of it somewhere we can see it soon, or how can we watch United in Anger?
Okay, well, you can see United in Anger several ways. I mean, the DVD is on Amazon. You can watch it on Google Play and iTunes. But I'm having a small screening. I've been having these series of screenings at the Filmmakers Co-op. The Filmmakers Co-op is the oldest cooperative distributor of personal cinema in the world. And they have a small screening space on Park Avenue and 32nd Street. It's in one of those buildings, but it's on the 6th floor, and there's this crazy thing in the middle of it. And I showed Homosexual Desire in Minnesota there on March 4th, last Friday. And on April 1st, I'm showing some of my short films. And on May 6th, I'm showing United in Anger. And, so it gets shown from time to time. But as I said, you can get the DVD from Amazon.
Okay. Do you have a website where we can check you out?
I don't have a personal website. I'm not technologically astute. United in Anger has a website, which is www.unitedinanger.com, and the ACT UP Oral History Project has a website, actuporalhistory.org.
Okay.
And yeah, I suppose I should get around to it, but it's enough to figure out how to edit these films.
Well, I wish you the best of luck with everything that you have going on and the new film that you're currently working on, transferring all of that film to digital. I'll be looking forward to seeing it. In the meantime, you can check out Jim's work at unitedinanger.com, where you can find out everything that's going on with the screenings and purchase the DVD. You can also check out the ACT UP Oral History Project at actuporalhistory.org, where you can find out about all of the different things that are going on with that project. I'm Dyllon Burnside, and this is the Artists Forum. Thank you for tuning in tonight.
Hi, I'm Haley Chancellor, a volunteer with the Artists Forum.
And I'm Elliot Torres, host of the Artists Forum's television program, AFTV. We're here on set to tell you about our latest endeavor, the Artists Forum Festival of the Moving Image.
This new film festival is a major endeavor for the Artists Forum, one we believe will greatly impact both underserved artists and the New York City arts community as a whole.
The Artists Forum Festival of the Moving Image is a competitive program open worldwide to filmmakers of all levels, seeking to gain exposure in New York City's international market. With your help, this film festival will be a great platform to invigorate our city's cultural scene.
Live screenings of the top entries will be showcased this spring at a theater in New York City, followed by a panel discussion, Q&As, and many other fun-filled surprises leading up to our after-party and award ceremony.
While the Artists Forum strives to be financially independent, we need your help to make our inaugural film festival a terrific success.
Recognition for your generosity will be acknowledged in a variety of ways. In return for your support, we are offering numerous perks and public acknowledgement of your generosity.
Since we are a 501c3, your donations are fully tax deductible. Please help us continue our support of independent filmmakers by making a donation to fund the Artists Forum Festival of the Moving Image. And please consider also sharing your support with others by encouraging friends, family, and your social media networks to donate as well.
On behalf of everyone at the Artists Forum, we'd like to thank you for your support.
We look forward to having you join us in discovering the latest in unique and innovative filmmaking this spring at our festival in New York City.